because we're not hanging around. This is such an important story, and we're going to give it a little bit of extra time because it so vitally needs it. And I just have my guest connecting for me right now, which is wonderful. And good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
And our other guests are just connecting, and here we go. Terry is just connecting, and Father Hugh Sinclair as well. Good morning, Father Hugh. Just connecting to. We have Professor Michael Naughton on the screen. We now have Terry Wilcock. Good morning. Can you hear me, Terry? Don't worry, it will connect. We'll get there. We will absolutely get there. There you go. I just heard a connection. That was Terry, I think.
That's me.
Good morning, Terry. How are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Good
man. Right, there you go. That's perfect. Let's have that. And Father Hugh, it will connect. I have belief. We have a higher order overseeing us here, Father. Right, connected to audio. Just there we go. There you go. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're breaking up a bit.
Am I?
You're okay now.
Good. Okay. Well, let's just give it a few more seconds. Just wait for Father Hugh to hopefully connect with us. Right. Well, let's just give you some information while we're just waiting for Father Hugh to connect. So, as I say, this is such a vital story that we're going to give it some extra time because it's that important. The three men have joined me today because there is, oh, look, Father Hugh is getting a bit, what can we do for him? It should be fine. Oh, that would be such a pity. Let me just carry on. So the three men have joined me today because there is a man languishing in a British jail who has languished for 34 plus years. And there's every reason to believe that he is absolutely innocent. And not only should he be freed, but he should be exonerated. So we are talking about the 1989 conviction. There you go. Hello, Father Hugh. Can you hear us?
I can,
wonderful.
Yes,
Wonderful. Not at all. I'm so glad that you're with us. I've just given a very brief introduction, just saying that the three of you have joined me today because for the same reason, and that is Clive Freeman was convicted of a murder in 1989, and there is every reason to believe not only did he absolutely not do it, but that the man who died of natural causes, which we're going to go into in much greater detail during this conversation. But first of all, let me introduce my guests. We have Terry Wilcock, who met Clive Freeman in prison. We have Professor Michael Naughton, who has been campaigning against wrongful imprisonment for decades. And we have miscarriages of justice stalwart, Father Hugh Sinclair, who was involved with Birmingham 6, Guildford 4, and more, and is absolutely a supporter of Clive. All three men know Clive, are in regular communication with Clive. And I think I want to start with you, Terry, if I may. You met Clive in prison.
Yes.
You were serving a conviction for cannabis, which you dispute even to this day. And me personally, I don't believe anybody should be serving anything for cannabis, but that's a whole other show. But you met Clive in prison in Leyhill, I believe, in Gloucester. And how did he sort of introduce the issue? Don't all lifers say they're innocent, Terry?
Yes, they do. A lot of them do. But Clive was something different. I immediately believed in him and his story after I met him in Leyhill prison. And I introduced him to another inmate, a serving prisoner, called Rohan Pashad, who was actually a barrister, a QC, in fact, and serving time for VAT fraud. Between us, we agreed to have some meetings in Clive's cell, and Rohan Pashad, again, another supporter, believed in him and asked him to get the files from the solicitors, from his current solicitors. 13 boxes eventually turned up, and between the three of us, we went through every document page by page. Rohan found a document which had been concealed for 25 years at the time, which was the first, it was the first conclusion, cause of death by the pathologist for the Crown, Richard Shepherd, who stated that the cause of death was acute pancreatitis, probably alcohol related. So then that was a CCRC application, which went on for 3.5 years. It took, although he was given priority because of his health and age, time spent in prison. But that was rejected. The non-disclosure of that document, which would have assisted Clive in his defence at the trial, was rejected by the CCIC, unfortunately. So yes. Basically, that's how I met him in the library. We used to talk and meet in the library in the prison, and we became good friends.
Okay. Can I just ask, is there somebody in one of your rooms? Because I can hear the movement very clearly.
It's a dog. Did you take the dog outside?
Oh, dogs. Don't talk to me about dogs. Please don't talk to me about dogs. I have an insane dog. Father Hugh, you are an absolute stalwart of miscarriages of justice. You're in no doubt that Clive is a miscarriage of justice.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I supported quite a number of people who were claiming they suffered miscarriage of justice. I met Clive probably 30 years ago or more, not long after he was received into prison, having been convicted of this offence. He asked me to do simple things like contacting people for him, and gradually I got to know him, and the more I heard him, he would talk to me incessantly about his case, about the way things had happened, and he asked me to help him in whatever way I could. So I did contact then on his behalf a number of forensic scientists and lawyers who were prepared to take up his case. And I followed him through these 30 years. I've followed him around most of the prisons, and a considerable number of prisons in England over these 30 odd years. And the more I heard, the more I saw, the more I had contact with him, the more I became convinced that he was certainly a victim of a miscarriage of justice.
Right.
And through the course of that, we've probably gone to the CCRC, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, 4 or 5 times and got knocked back every time, despite really the fact that we had a volume of evidence that contradicted Richard Shepherd's original his evidence in the court. Well, one is just horrified really at the way the CCR does operate, I think, because it just doesn't seem to take on board or do what it was supposed to do after the May Commission was called to set up looking into injustice cases. And I think he's been a victim not just of what happened in court, but what's happened ever since.
Well, this brings us very neatly to Michael. So the Crown's case was that Clive had murdered Alexander Hardy, a stranger he'd met in a pub. This was supposed to be part of an insurance scam. He'd only met Hardy the night before. And the idea was apparently that there would be a fire and the body would be wrongly identified as Freeman, £300,000 paid out, etc., etc. Michael, tell us, what are your problems with this conviction?
Well, thank you, Sonia. I think I've been working on alleged wrongful convictions now for 20 years. And, you know, when I first started off, the Criminal Case Review Commission had just been established, and it was established because the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4 cases had been able to reveal the limitations with the existing criminal appeal system at that time. So there needed to be this new body, because the existing legal system didn't actually deal with certain cases if they didn't have this thing called fresh evidence. So people have had a fair trial, but then they don't have this new evidence that wasn't available. So they can't overturn their convictions even if they're innocent.
Right.
That wasn't considered to be acceptable. So this Criminal Cases Review Commission was set up. And like Father Sinclair says, its brief was to be able to deal with these cases that the legal system couldn't deal with in the interests of truth and justice, because it's not acceptable by the British public for innocent people to languish in prison. The problem with the CCRC is, though, that when it was established, there was a clause, and I don't know why this was put in or who it was put in by, but instead of it being independent and being able to investigate alleged wrongful convictions independently, because it has a budget, it has lots of powers to be able to do things if it wants to, but it's hamstrung because it can only refer a case back to the Court of Appeal if it's deemed to have a real possibility that it will be overturned. So what the CCRC has to do, it then has to look at the criteria of the Court of Appeal, and it has to say, well, the Court of Appeal only wants cases where there's fresh evidence. So we're back to square one, and the CCRC now just mirrors what the Court of Appeal does. And so I used to try to help people and make applications to the CCRC with innocence projects, and I've given up that project because case after case after case after case is being rejected. I was looking at our database this morning, and Clive is on our database, but I don't know exactly when Clive contacted us, but certainly more than 10 years ago, Clive contacted us. But we don't have a lot of information about his case, but it kind of jumped off the page at that time because there's people who are convicted for crimes that they didn't do. So there's a murder and the wrong person is convicted, like the Birmingham 6 or the Guildford 4. Then there's these other crimes where no crime actually occurred. And I've been writing about, first wrote about that in 2004. And Clive fits into that category, that there's been this unwillingness by Richard Shepherd, the forensic pathologist, to revisit this case, despite the fact that there's now a kind of group of 9 of the most eminent forensic pathologists in the world that have all said that Richard Shepherd made a mistake. But the CCRC, every time a new report comes in from a new expert, they don't think, well, this is the 6th one, this is the 7th one, this is the 8th one, this is now 9. They just look at them individually, send them to Richard Shepherd, and say, well, this is questioning what you said. What do you say? And he says, I stick by my original findings. And so the case is rejected.
It's ridiculous. It's circular, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous. Terry, you made a promise to Clive when you left him in prison that you would do everything you could to have him cleared, exonerated and freed. And you sent me a recording this week that you had made with Clive, with his permission, in which he talks about what Michael has just referred to, the 9 eminent pathologists, the importance of us really pushing home that information. Now, was it yourself and Father Hugh who went and well, not confronted, probably not, that sounds a bit hostile, but Richard Shepherd, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
And what did you give him?
Sorry, Terry.
Sorry, yes, we attended one of his shows. He's touring the country promoting a book, and he was having talks around theatres in the country, and me and Father Hugh and a reporter attended one, and we went to the book signing thereafter, and Father Hugh approached Richard Shepherd and asked him what he thought about Clive Freeman's case, which by that time had been 33 years, and he remembered immediately. He said, that case has been on my mind. Fresh evidence. He said, yes, I would if it came from a solicitor, which we arranged. And then he asked the security to have us removed, which we left. And I was holding a banner, Free Clive Freeman, 35 years in prison for a murder that never was. Because we have 9 pathologists, all eminent pathologists, all denying Richard Shepherd's conclusion, and two in particular, Kroll and Kohler, American-based, have done the study of 2,000 similar deaths of what Shepherd said, and their conclusion was it's actually impossible, scientifically impossible for this guy to have died the way Richard Shepherd said he did. So they joined the other 7 in total. Professor Mant, Ackland, Milroy, Crane, Karch, Kroll, Kohler, Birch, Knight. Some of those are OBEs.
This is significant. I mean,
450 years in total experience.
And as you point out, or you pointed out to me rather, that Clive's tariff was 13 years. And
That's
he
correct.
would be absolutely out by now if he was prepared to have said, I'm guilty, I did it, but he won't. He simply won't say it. Now, let's talk about the other thing that he'd said on that recording, Terry, if I may, and that was, he talked about the bruising to the back and about how only Richard Shepherd had apparently seen those photos. Did I get that correct?
Yes, on the third autopsy, not on the first or the second or the third. In fact, the back was examined in one of those previous autopsies, and Richard Shepherd said no marks to the back other than acne. So the back was clear at that stage. On the third autopsy, after he'd been speaking to the officers dealing with the case, he discovered a bruise in 3 places on the back, which could have only appeared by having a heavy object placed on the chest. This is being contradicted by some of the pathologists and specialists in that field, but yet it still remains. At one stage, he said, on a telephone interview with the CCRC, he said he discovered the bruises and dissected them. We've seen no photos of the bruises. We've seen no photos of any dissection other than on one of the arms was dissected because a bruise was discovered, and we see photos of that, and that's the proper way to deal with this situation by a pathologist, but yet no evidence of any bruising other than what Shepherd said in his theory of the Birkin hair.
It is very, very strange. Father, one of the things that you're absolutely aware of is that the sort of degree of effort it takes in order to be able to overturn these miscarriages of justice. If we were on a sort of line of 0 to 10, where are we with Clive in terms of getting closer to something like that?
It's very difficult to say, actually, because we're living in a fog, really, or a situation of real impasse where our only way out is through the CCRC, it seems to me. And they keep coming up. Again, one of the things they do, they say, this issue was dealt with at the trial. Now, if you bring 8 other people in who say that's wrong, they still say, well, it was an issue that was dealt with at the trial, and therefore, you know, we're not really going to pay much attention to it. And there is another issue in this case which concerns, Clive had an alibi, which was never disproved. He was looking for his daughter the night before he left. He went to a club in Earl's Court, and he was drunk, carrying a suitcase, and the doorman told him that he'd be better off going across the road to a hotel there and sleep it off, so he'd be all right for going off on a plane in the morning. Now, the woman who gave evidence, the woman working in the hotel, said quite simply, yes, I signed him in. She was treated as a hostile witness by the prosecution, who'd called her, actually. And she said Clive could have, if he had left the hotel, he could not have got back in without being let in by somebody.
Yes.
And there was a big distance between the hotel where he was and the flat that he was living in when he was supposed to have carried out this murder. And everybody's quite clear that he was drunk. 20 years after the event, we actually we found the doorman through an advert in a South African newspaper.
Wow.
And I've got his statement here. He signed an affidavit in front of her. Well, we put that in too, and they didn't even bother with that because they said, again, the issue of the alibi had been dealt with at the trial.
It was almost a foregone conclusion. I should say this will be the first of many occasions that we will visit this story. And as we go deeper into the story, it will become apparent that there are other issues going on in the background of a political nature.
Yes.
And I think that's important just to touch upon that now so that our viewers can be absolutely aware that this, because there'll be people scratching their heads going, well, it doesn't make sense. 9 eminent pathologists, an alibi. It doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense if there's other things where strings are being pulled. That's when it does make sense. And one of the things you're absolutely aware of, Father Hugh, is the sheer effort that Clive has gone to in order to be able to have his voice heard. Tell us some about that.
Well, it is incredible, really. I mean, he's had 30 years and this thing has been in his head and in his heart all the way through. Particularly, he wanted to clear his name for the sake of his mum and other members of the family. He has no family in this country, so he's really on his own. And he has an encyclopedic knowledge of this case. You know, he can quote chapter and verse from the paperwork. And I think it's very difficult for anyone to actually catch, you never jump to catch him out, if I put it that way. He lives day by day with this case. He prays about it. He's a man of prayer. And there are times, you know, you can imagine every time he lost in the Criminal Case Review Commission, it was a complete knocking down, really. His hopes would be built up when the papers went in. We'd wait for years for answers, and then nothing. And it's a tremendous spirit. Maybe it's something about the South African character. I think he just is determined.
Right.
Well, one just becomes more and more convinced by the way he speaks about this, that it's all wrong.
Well, and the thing is, Michael, I'm sure you've had a similar experience, but my experience is when somebody's innocent, they can't stop telling you they're innocent, right?
Yeah. And he will talk to anybody who listens.
Right, good. And that's what we want. Sorry, Michael.
I was just going to say that if anybody wants to get a kind of comprehensive understanding of Clive Freeman's applications to the Criminal Case Review Commission and what's being asked of the CCRC and what their response is, there's an article on CCRC Watch website. So if you just put CCRC Watch Clive Freeman into Google, the article will come up. And I think anybody who reads that with an open mind will be saying Clive Freeman shouldn't be in prison, should never have been charged with any offence, no crime actually happened. But you see, this is about Clive Freeman, but I've been trying to reform the CCRC because of innocent people in prison, but as I said, for 20 years. And we produced a dossier of cases about 10 years ago, and then we had 44 cases of people convicted of murder, child sexual offence, terrorist offences, all kinds of other offences that have been rejected by the CCRC, not because they're not innocent, but because the CCRC say they didn't have new evidence of their innocence. So as Father Sinclair says, they say the court's already dealt with that point. We don't care if you're innocent. And what I always find interesting is you get a lot of commentators about the criminal justice system in this country, very eminent people, and they point fingers around the world like, oh, if you go to America, they have a worse criminal justice system than us. If you go to these other countries, they have a worse criminal justice than us. And they say, oh, in America, you know, if you've had a fair trial, it doesn't matter if you're innocent in prison.
Right.
And you say to them, do you not understand that there are people in prison in this country who are languishing in prison, and we've got evidence of their innocence, like Clive Freeman, and nobody seems to even know about their cases, and everybody still thinks we have the best criminal justice system in the world. And so we need people to get behind this case. We need people to read about this case, and we need people to join the campaign for the CCRC to be reformed or replaced, because we need a body that can help innocent people trapped in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I completely agree with that. not enough people do know about this case. This is very new to a lot of our viewers, because I put out a tweet yesterday saying we were covering it, and I received emails saying, never heard about that case, but I'm just reading about it now. And I want to thank Aaron for bringing us all together today, who's worked fastidiously to make sure that we're all here today talking about this situation. Now, Terry, there is another reason why time is absolutely imperative that we act regarding Clive, and that is, I believe he's 78 now, and he's not well, is he?
No, he's got cancer. He's had a prognosis which he doesn't discuss, but he said it's not good, Terry. He's frail, and his voice, when I speak to him on the telephone, gets worse by the week. He's out of breath. He has to walk from one wing to another to get to the phone. He's struggling. He's very, very ill indeed. I'm just touching on the hotel situation. I know it's evidence, and we're not on a trial here. This is not a trial today. We haven't got the time for that, but we might discuss evidence in another show, which will be interesting. Because Monica Barber was the receptionist. The Trevea Hotel was a hotel. I visited that. I took pictures of it. I looked. It was locked up. I looked through the door. The desk was directly feet away from the door, from the entrance where Monica Barber sat that night. She didn't see Clive leave or return. He was sleeping when this guy died at the other side of London.
Right.
And there was one other witness quickly. David Taylor was an eyewitness who said he's seen Clive enter the flat where Hardy died that night. I think it was 9 years later. He couldn't live with himself. He retracted his evidence and wrote to the authorities and said that he was coerced into saying it, or he didn't see him. He actually didn't see him. But that's all evidence we can discuss. The prosecution and the CCRC say, well, there's circumstantial evidence, and even if it didn't, if we disregard Shepherd's evidence, there's circumstantial evidence to say that he could have also done it. And that's what the judge said too. But the fact of the matter is, there was no murder. So the circumstantial evidence goes out the window. The guy died of alcohol and drugs. That's the case as we see it. Right.
And there was lots of information that didn't add up. I think they'd said that that he was homeless, and in fact he wasn't homeless at all. I think he had a property. He lived in a flat in Brixton, as one example. So there's lots of details that didn't really add up, which I'm sure Father Hugh, having gone through various miscarriages of justice, it must feel a bit like banging your head against a brick wall, because we hear from Michael that the whole CCRC process is just circular. It is just so incredibly frustrating, and the whole criminal justice system needs a review. And so, I mean, what can we do as people watching this now? Because people will feel helpless. They're hearing what you're saying, where there's clearly an issue. I only had to do a cursory glance at this case to realize there was an issue with it, without having to do the deep dive that all three of you have done. So, Father, what can we do to raise awareness to this situation?
Well, I think have access through programs like yours and any other way in which we can maybe spread the news, really. I've always thought one thing I'd like to find out, which it happened in one of the other cases I knew about, to find out what it was that the jury accepted to convict him in the first place.
Right.
If there are any jurors who listen to your program, very interesting to find out, because I think it might raise other issues. Yes, I think we just keep plugging away, doing whatever we can. I'd say certainly for Terry and myself too, this case is in our heads and in our hearts every day. I mean, It doesn't go away. Clive will ring me maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Really? That many? I mean, when I heard his voice on that recording, I could hear the vulnerability. Because, and we discussed this when we'd all had a sort of, a test and a chat earlier this week. And one of the things that I said was, how do you get through that? How do you get through it? And I think I said, how do you get through the day? And I think Michael said, actually, no, for these prisoners, it's about getting through the next minute. Was that you said that to me, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it's a question that we always ask people who spent a long time in prison, and I've met men who spent 25, 35 years in prison. And I say that to them, I say, is it just about getting through the day? And they just look at me and go, the day? Sometimes you're just trying to get through the next minute. And they kind of, on the surface, you know, they try and put a front on. But the research shows that people who go into prison who actually did the crime that they went into prison for, every day in prison is a closer time, you know, another day closer to being released. But the research by Oxford University is that every day an innocent person spends in prison, the harm of that wrongful conviction gets worse. Yeah. And there's no end in sight for people like Clive because he won't say he did it. So a lot of these, the way that you get out of prison is you've got to do offending behaviour courses. Right. And your offending behaviour courses are tailored to the crime that you're in prison for. And some of these offending behaviour courses require you to admit your guilt because people want to see remorse. Right. So prisoners maintaining innocence can't admit their guilt because then they give up their chances of ever overturning their convictions on appeal. Right. So they're literally trapped in prison. Nobody knows about them, and we don't realise it in this country. You know, we have people who are given a 13-year tariff and they're still in prison after 35 years. And so, you know, we're going to have a public event in the spring next year. And we want more and more people, because if you look at the history of criminal justice system reform in this country, whether it be the Court of Appeal, the abolition of capital punishment, the setting up of the CCRC, the introduction of the Crown Prosecution Service, all of these things were when there was a public crisis of confidence in the existing criminal justice system because of miscarriage of justice cases. So this is why I try to highlight these cases like Clive's, because anybody who looks at that case will say the CCRC isn't working as it should be working. And we need that groundswell of public crisis of confidence in the existing system so that we can actually get it reformed or replaced. Absolutely. Michael, I should say to our viewers, we'll be returning to talk about another case which is of great interest to us. And again, we feel is absolutely felt by the CCRC, which is obviously the criminal review body. And that is the case of Jeremy Bamber. And so just to be in prison for such a lengthy period of time, Terry, what is it absolutely vital that our viewers understand about this unsafe conviction?
Well, we have to understand that a guy's lost his life for something he didn't do, for something what never actually happened. We have to think about him laid in that cell day after day, night after night, losing his wife to cancer, losing his father, losing his mother, losing friends, relatives, all died now. And he made a promise to Aura, his wife, that he wouldn't leave prison unless he was exonerated and a free man, and he's kept to that promise despite serving 20 years more than what he could have done had he admitted it. Touching on what Father Hugh said regarding the jury, what they've seen and what they heard, just quickly, because I know Clive would want me to mention this. Professor Mann had 40 years experience. He was the pathologist for the defence. He stated the facts. He stated that he thought that death was due to alcohol and drugs, exactly what Shepherd's conclusion was on his first opinion, which he concealed. And he gave a theatrical show to the jury. The warden sat beside Clive, said that guy should be in Hollywood. He was throwing his arms around, raising his voice, and saying that he'd learned this technique in the forces. We've got ex-Grey Scouts. I think 4 or 5 of them have brought statements to say they was never trained in the Birkin. And that's a silent killing, what Shepherd described. And Mr. Mann, Professor Mann, was 40 years experience. Shepherd's was at that time was 2 years experience, but he swayed the jury with his act. I didn't realise that he'd had such little experience at that by the point of that trial. 2 years. That's very interesting. I should point out, obviously, if you hadn't already picked up, Clive wasn't originally from the UK. Was he born in Rhodesia? Is that correct? Yes, that's correct.
Right. So that's, you know, I mean, all of this stuff is so vital. As I say, please see this as an introduction into the case, because there's so much more to explore, which is why I wanted to give it a bit more time today. Father Hugh, what is it that you feel is absolutely vital that our viewers know about this case in order to get behind it?
That Clive's innocent. that's the bottom line, you know. I've always said that the fact that the law makes mistakes, we should accept, because it's not an exact science. Our big problem is that we take so long and we're so obstructive really in trying to put the wrongs right. Right. It's the system that's wrong and it needs to be changed. And so I think supporting things like what Michael's been talking about is important, that people educate themselves about the realities of our legal system and the way it operates. Absolutely, because people just get demonized, and then obviously they get demonized in the media and they're monsters, and then that's it. And then the whole public, you know, have this attitudes towards them, and you have to almost penetrate all that. You have to remove all those obstacles of what people think about a character before you can even get them through to the other side, to where the real evidence is. Michael, give us a sort of takeaway message about what we need to know.
Well, you know, I mean, in the 20 years that I've been working on wrongful convictions, I think that, you know, when you talk about the harmful consequences to innocent victims of wrongful convictions once they've overturned their cases, you know, it's quite a difficult sell while they're in prison. People just want to kind of hang on to the belief that they are guilty. When they come out of prison innocent, we have Netflix programs about them. Everybody watches them. Everybody says, you know, oh my God, I heard about this innocent person in prison. But the case then has already been overturned and they don't realize there's other people in prison. Right. And one of the things that I've been doing to try to get the British public more concerned about wrongful convictions is to say, well, if you don't care about innocent people in prison, you need to consider this. And this doesn't apply in Clive Freeman's case, obviously. But if you're thinking about a kind of more kind of general kind of murder conviction where somebody's in prison for 20, 30 years saying they didn't do it, what it means is that the real murderer is at liberty with the potential and reality to commit further crimes. And the research in the United States on the first 150 DNA exonerations by the Innocence Project showed that because they were able to identify in the first 150 DNA exonerations who the real rapist and murderer was. So then they looked into their criminal histories while they were at wrongful liberty, and they found out that these people had committed another 36 murders, another 30-odd rapes, and loads of other serious offences. So innocent people in prison, if you don't care about them, well, that's okay, but you need to care about yourself. Right. And you need to know that people are out there who have actually done the murders and the crimes that other people are in prison for.
They're still walking around.
So it's not that we're do-gooders and want to believe that people say they're innocent. Right. It's not that we believe people. I've written an awful lot about the reasons why people say they're innocent when they're not. And we just only focus on cases like Clive's, where there's all of this evidence that totally discredits any reason why they're in prison at all. And so, you know, we want people to follow up from watching this channel and watching these interviews and do some research for yourself. Yeah. Contact me, contact Father Hugh, contact Terry, and join the campaign to try to get Clive Freeman's case opened up again.
And where can we join that campaign?
Well, write an email to Empowering the Innocent and we'll start to liaise it from there.
Right.
We'll get a petition going if we get enough people writing in, and we'll organise public meetings and we'll just keep this going.
Yeah, it makes absolutely no sense. This conviction makes no sense. And the reason why obviously Michael is saying it doesn't apply in this case is because there's every reason to believe, sadly, that the man in question died through natural causes. Well, if you can call drink and drugs natural causes. But the point is, it wasn't a murder. And
well, just to finish, I mean, I've just written an article and, you know, I believed for many, many years that if we just did the right kind of applications to the Criminal Case Review Commission, surely it would actually refer those cases. And I've just written this article that says that there's this adage that says, if the evidence doesn't fit the theory, you need to change the theory. Yeah. So in the first few years of the CCRC, okay, you're going to give it a bit of a chance. But after 25 years of the Criminal Cases Review Commission, all the evidence that we have and all the cases that are stacking up, the theory needs to be changed. And the theory that the CCRC exists to help innocent people in prison needs to be replaced with the theory that the CCRC is set up to render wrongful convictions invisible and to stop them coming to public attention. That's the evidence that we can see with all of these cases, and none better than Clive Freeman.
I was just going to say what a stunning legacy it would be if we're able to find any silver lining at all for this awful, what appears to be unquestionably a miscarriage of justice. If there's any silver lining, it's that Clive's case may be the hinge which changes the system. And please God, may that happen. I want to thank you all very much for joining us this morning. As I say, this is a continuing conversation for us. Everybody, please check this out. Clive Freeman, absolutely to believe to be one of our longest serving miscarriage of justice prisoners in the UK. I want to thank Terry Wilcock for joining us, Father Hugh Sinclair, and Professor sorry, I've just suddenly forgotten your name, Michael. I was just going to call you Paul, and Professor Michael Naughton. Thank you all so very much for everything you're doing, because I tell you what, there but for the grace of God go any of us. And if any of us are in that position, I want to know that there are people like you out here who are still fighting for us and being a voice. So thank you so much. Take good care of yourself. And once again, Aaron, thank you so much for making all this possible. Take good care of yourself.
Sonia, can I just say thank you for having the courage to take this on and put it before the people, because it's been a long time coming, but maybe now we can move things on.
God willing.
But thank you for yes, and those of you who do pray for Clive, and in fact for Alexander Hardy, the man who died.
Absolutely, and that's the thing, is that by
them both,
absolutely, by clearing Clive, that's no reflection on Alexander at all. But I'm sure that even a dead man would want the truth to be known. I'm sure of that. So take good care of yourself, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. Everybody, free Clive Freeman. Take good care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
God bless.
Bye. This is, you see, these miscarriages of justice, it's horrendous. And especially when you're dealing with such a system as the CCRC, which is fairly heinous, frankly, not helpful.